Carlos, can you just clap real quick?
Right now? We know where that is. Right now? It was just that turning. You gotta clap louder.
You see what you started? Okay, how's everybody doing?
Doing great.
Good? Give a high five to the person to the left or to the right. Good job.
Elbows. Look at elbows. Every time you look at someone's elbows, it still work there.
So,
It's more effective.
Yeah.
the team, let's take a deep breath. Let's take a deep breath. Deep breath, deep breath, deep breath. So, Paul and I wanted to talk this morning about, we've been talking a lot about yesterday about, well, how do we measure public opinion? How do we really measure the support of the public, et cetera, et cetera? And we want to talk a little bit about how to, for pretty much this thing called framing the movement victoriously. Because, and we'll get to explain this a little bit more, but so much of the movement is about perception. And so much about measuring the public is about perception of how the public sees a specific conflict unfold. Is that correct? Because most of the public is not in our email list, or most of the public is not in an organizational membership, so they don't technically know if we are winning or we're losing. So there's a big perception battle that we want to talk about, because I think it's, the important thing to know is that it's different to measure organizational capacity than to measure support. And sometimes we want to measure it equally, and sometimes it's different. So we're going to talk about this. Paul, want to rock and roll this part?
Yes. So why is victory important? Well,
I mean, you did a good job of recruiting, I just want to
so
say.
I have.
How do we define victory?
Yeah, that's the question. How do you define victory? Because what we talked about before with the monolithic versus pluralistic power is that the public generally sees things as monolithic. So they think unless you convince Congress and the elites to change their mind and have a moral conversion, which they think you could do through having a nice little conversation with Obama, right? If he just had more data, he would, if he just knew the right policy resolution. So, first, but this is really important, is because the perceptions of success within our movement is one of the most important things for our movements to survive. So these are quotes, some from sportscasters, from famous people, all around this concept. So nothing puts fannies in the seats like winning. Okay? Everybody wants to root for the winning team, right? All of a sudden, there's Dodgers fans or Yankees fans. I mean, everybody, I think, dislikes the Yankees fans because they get a team that's always winning because they have so much money, right? So anyways, nothing succeeds like success. Anyone wants to root for the winning team. If you win everything, this is from James Carville, because he was analyzing the Clinton. He's married to the campaign coordinator of Bush. Married, what's her name?
Madeline?
Yeah. So he's like, well, everything I did was right, and everything she did was wrong. And why? It's because she lost and I won, right? So he said, when you win a campaign, everything you did was right, and if you lose, everything you did was wrong. But it's actually much more complex than that, right? So we have to say, within our movement, we have to be very clear about what is victory, and part of that is metrics. But we're going to talk about that because people are going to join us, and the public is going to join us, if we define that right and win the battle about what is victorious. So first, for the movement, there's two major groups, and these are different. Within the movement, there's a perception of success and failure, but you can control that through your own mechanism of success and failure. And the way I explain this is that in the labor movement I was part of, there's really deep structure. And we can train the workers to believe in a demand that they don't really understand because we have the trust in the relationship with them. So we can really, through relationship, really control an understanding of what is victorious. We can frame it around the structure. With momentum-like organizations, it's much harder because there isn't the structure or the relationship with everybody that's affiliated with your movement. So it's very hard. So a lot of times, the press and the public define what is victorious. Like for Occupy, I think the press really defined most of the debate within the movement, a lot of it, because they get to define and communicate and have a dialogue with your participants more than even the leadership of the movement, right? So we have to think about victory in these two categories. How do we really frame it and make it clear for everybody that belongs to our movement, and how do we fight in the public around that fight of monolithic and pluralistic power?
Just to add a point here, that I think it's important in victory is that because another way to measure our power is to understand the level of participation that we have from participants. So when your movement does a campaign and the campaign is seen as failure, people demobilize. So you actually get weaker. But sometimes we frame the movement victory in a way that it's already going to lose. So we have to figure out really the framing is very important, because when you go from campaign to campaign, you actually, like for example, what happened that last year, I was part of the coaching the PICO National Network on their immigration campaign. And we were doing this campaign, we were trying to get teams started, all the stuff, and the team kept saying, Carlos, this is a one-year campaign. And in this year we're gonna win or we're gonna lose. And I'm like, idiots, stop saying that. We are not going to win this year. So what happened, and Jacqueline and Stefania can tell me if I'm, or Fatima can tell me if I'm right or if I'm wrong, they told the whole membership, and I can tell them, don't say that, it's a 2 to 3 year campaign, this is just the first year. Like I wanted to keep framing that this is the year that PICO enters the struggle. Like if we feel like we enter the struggle, we are winning. And they said, no, Carlos, no, it's about, we don't have more money, doesn't matter we have no more money. And let me ask the people from PICO, did we get more people after the year, or did we get less people at the end?
We got less people at the end.
Because people got demobilized. Does this make sense? Now, technically, PICO grew dramatically in the Latino community. Engaged the largest amount of Latino organizers, engaged the largest amount of teams, did great work. I mean, they became a new player in the migrant rights movement, but everybody feels they lost.
And that was because of the way they framed it.
They
not
framed it.
how the public framed it. That's how they framed it.
So we want to make these two distinctions, because think about people that are volunteering your movement. They're putting their lives on the line. They're sacrificing in volunteering. They have to feel that they're having success. So it's different to go, if you're, as a paid organizer, it's different to go through a failure than through a leader that is volunteering. So let's continue.
So how do different people define victories in different ways? How do we control the perceptions of the movement to the press and the public and the participants? How do we, now that we know it's so important, how do you actually do that? Well, first thing that I want to say, we've been talking about this a lot, about the metrics, okay, is that we have to be clear about the metrics, okay? If you're not clear about the metrics and you're not defending that, and the leaders of the movement is not defending that, then how can you expect that anybody is going to have a shared one? They're going to probably have the monolithic concept of victory, right? Because that's what most of the public does. So you have to organize. Part of this is a process of mass training. And when I started meeting all these Serbians at different trainings or conferences, I was just amazed at how unified they were. They were very diverse politics, but how unified they were strategically. And I said, how in the hell did you guys, how you think strategically the same? How do you do that? And he says, that's because we realized that in a decentralized organization, we had to train everyone in a theory of change and the same strategic understanding. And then we encourage debate within that framework, okay? But the first thing we have to do is agree on what is the metrics for victory within ourselves, okay? And within our model, the hybrid model that we're proposing, our theory, is that there's two metrics. One is how much public support are you getting? And that is there good polarization? And that's exactly what you did in the power graph, right? And you can measure that through polling. Like I went to NDN, Andre, who analyzed all that polling from the immigrant rights movement, and he gave me a very similar analysis of what we subjectively came up with, okay? So you can check that out scientifically, but there is a measurement of what is good polarization. And later in the day, we're going to talk about what creates good polarization, but that's one metric of measuring whether or not your movement, because you're getting more popular public support and popular support. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. And the second one is how much capacity of the movement is increasing. Okay, like Pico, he was talking about. They framed the victory victoriously, but they didn't frame it as the success will be judged based on whether or not Pico actually expands to all these communities. That's a huge frame, and it's easy for people to understand. And in Serbia and the Akbar movement, a lot of their objectives of how they framed victory was saying, we will win when the movement becomes bigger. They framed a lot of campaigns that way. And they taught their members and the public that they were going to be victorious. But in Occupy, I don't think we necessarily framed it that way. You know, even though the movement was expanding, it was exploding, and people still feel it was a failure, right? So we have a whole metric of how to judge that, because a lot of times structured organizations have a different way of measuring that than what we're going to talk about. But it's the same basic concept of, did your movement grow? Did you have a greater capacity to do more good polarization? Go ahead.
Since this is a hybrid model, I want to bring in something from the structured tradition that I don't see here at all, which is, you know, improving the lives of your members or the general community. You know, did their lives get better through some extra funding, through the change of a policy, and that's not reflected?
See, in this model, we agree with you. But what we say is that if you get the 3.5, right, a lot of things change. When you change the political climate, everything changes,
Right.
okay? And we're going to go over that more. But
Can I just answer
Go
what
ahead.
Dan is saying? I think, Dan, the difference is that that's maybe a metric that you want to have within your small team, but not a metric for the whole movement. Because the difference is that if you put the whole movement that the change is instrumental, which is that the law has to change, then when that doesn't happen, failure is happening. I don't know if that makes some sense. So it's really important to distinguish, like, you might have a goal, like for us, internally for us in the immigrant rights movement, we want to legalize most people. And we just don't want to legalize them. We actually are very detailed, policy-oriented, specific how we want to do that, right, Carolina? Like, we're very specific. But if we actually say to people, like, right now in the immigrant movement, there's a debate, because we're pushing the precedent. I don't know if this is good for example. The precedent is getting pushed around stopping deportations,
Yeah.
right? And that is an interesting demand, because technically what I've been sharing with some of the movement leaders is that that is a wrong demand. Because all deportations are not going to stop. The president might be able to stop some deportations, but not all of them. So what happens is that in the perception of the movement, it seems as failure. And then what is going to happen is he's going to do some policy, and then all the policy experts are going to come and debate what policy was good. And we're going to enter a policy conversation, and the movement is going to feel like, what the heck is this, because I don't get the policy. So that's why we try to keep all that later and focus first on public opinion and thinking that those things happen.
see, if you in your movement really understand and teach people that the goal of your movement is to win the hearts and minds of people, you will dramatically change everything. But you don't know exactly how that's going to happen once you change the hearts and minds of people. And we're going to get into that. But if you change the political weather, everything else changes.
Next.
You're going to the instrumental. I think the 350 EPA rules thing, like the KXL versus.
Do you want to share? If you're going to share, go full.
Well, I just think, you know, like a lot of folks critique the environmental movement for focusing on the pipeline, because like through EPA regulations, the same kind of thing where executive branch could have done something that actually would have been much more impactful from like a policy perspective. But from a movement building perspective, make the pipeline was such a clear symbol that people were mobilized around it in a way that if they had entered into negotiations with the administration around like the EPA regulations, it would have totally demobilized people. And now they got the EPA regulations because there's this giant question about like what the administration is doing on climate change. So
Marriage equality is another great example, right? If the movement would have said, if we get a critical mass of public support around marriage equality, we will win. But we don't know if it's going to be through federal legislation, through legal stuff, through state legislation or whatever, then the movement would have felt really great because they were winning, and then they got a critical mass and boom, they're winning everywhere, okay? But the problem, if you make it instrumental, you say we have to win in this way, then it creates all these problems. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
And to ask, and we're going to talk about this and the difference between the objective and the method, because we struggle a lot that in the DREAM movement, because we started with an objective that was to pass the DREAM Act, but the method was through legislation. and when we wanted to shift the movement to say, well, that's not really gonna happen, let's do executive order, the movement was just going crazy. What do you mean, it's legislation? And it was like this constant battle about method, because we actually front-loaded the movement in a method that we should have been more open about. So we'll talk about this in more detail. Well,
You might get to this later, so if you're going to, just
We're gonna.
say that. But I'm wondering about when you decide to really heavily polarize, how you can prepare your people for the sort of like, sometimes when polarization happens, the perception is of failure or people getting more opposed because you polarize the opposition. I mean, sometimes it can actually be objectively bad. You polarize and you turn more people against you than you bring towards you.
Yes.
But sometimes even if you're winning sort of passive popular support, combined with a slightly more active and engaged opposition, it's the opposition that people focus on and then get down and get depressed and so forth and sad.
Well, I think that's the same thing in the immigrant rights movement in 2006. They had huge shifts in public opinion towards immigrant rights, but the racists got totally mobilized, and in southern areas where the racists have a huge demographic, they passed really heavy anti-legislation, anti-immigrant legislation. But the thing is the answer to all these questions is mass training. Because the thing is in a hierarchical organization, the top leaders, like in the ANC, the top leaders can hold the strategic knowledge and then give that in piecemeal to worker leaders or whatever in labor movement. But in our movement, if it's going to be decentralized, it's going to be momentum based, you have to train everyone in these metrics, like we're doing here. And that changes I'm going to give an example when we do mass training. Kate's done this a little bit on her campus of doing theory of change and grand strategy training, and it really changes everything.
So we already talked about this. Okay.
So the reason why our metrics for organization is a little bit different is because when you're in a movement, in Midwest Academy, this is very, when it comes to building a strong organization and the building organizational capacity, is really related to membership organization. In our cycle, it's building more of a loose structure, and we're going to get into that in absorption, so that you can do another round of escalation, so that you can create another moment of the whirlwind. And that's a different way of thinking, okay, did the movement become stronger so that they could do it again? So it's about whether or not you did good polarization, and then whether or not you created the capacity to do it in the future. Okay? And there's a lot of things that are measured, if you think about it, that give you capacity to do another round. And that's the cycle of momentum. If you can do that, if you can measure whether or not we did good polarization and whether or not to have a strong organization to do it again, you can do it again and again and again, and then our movements become really resilient, and then you create rounds of popular movement explosions.
So are we gonna jump into, so for polarization, that's gonna be measured by like polling data, right?
That's
What
right.
about the capacity of the movement extending? How do we measure that?
We're going to get to that in absorption.
Okay.
But just a context is like you can say we're going to be successful once the movement becomes national, and that could be if we have groups in 7 states. But that's very subjective. I mean, that could be like you have 15 people or 20 people in 7 states.
That's how you
And-
can. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and you can put a picture on Facebook, and we have 7 different Arkansas, Massachusetts, and it's like we're national movement now. But this is what it has. This is what happens: is that is so simple, and some of us get so complicated on success that we don't make it really tiny, so that people can go again. It's like we're gonna become first statewide, and what's statewide? We're in 3 cities. We're in Miami, Central Florida, and Tallahassee. I mean, it's like, are you really statewide? No, but if people perceive it that way, you are.
We're going to talk more about that.
And it's a big deal. Like in United We Dream, there's a big perception that we're the largest network of undocumented young people. Maybe we are, maybe we're not. I don't know. But that is a perception. That I'm just being real. We build this up, right? But there's a perception, and if you ask people, some people why they join, they will ask us because they want to join the largest. It's such a perception game. You know, the oldest. It's like, what's the oldest? It's like 5 years, like, or 6. I don't know. It's like the oldest. Like we've been hundreds. It's really old perception games.
The largest
Perception
march this year for Walmart workers. In the history of this year.